The stars had always called to humanity, and humanity had answered with open arms and hopeful hearts. By the year 2347, the children of Earth had spread across 12 star systems, building colonies on distant worlds and making friends with alien species they had once only dreamed about in science fiction stories. The Galactic Concord welcomed them, or so it seemed. 47 species working together for peace and prosperity. And humans had earned their seat at the table through hard work, diplomacy, and an endless desire to understand the universe around them. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the carrier Prometheus, watching the blue marble of Earth grow smaller in the view screen as her ship prepared for another routine patrol. She smiled as she thought about her daughter Maya, just 11 years old, who had sent her a video message that morning talking excitedly about her dream of becoming a xenobiologist. "I want to understand them, Mom," Maya had said with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin. "I want to know why the Velthari have 3 hearts, and why the Kreth can see colors we cannot even imagine." Elena had promised to call her back that evening, never knowing that evening would never come. The first warnings came without context. Strange readings on the long-range sensors, ships appearing where no ship should be, and then silence from the outer colonies. Captain Torres burst onto the bridge with terror in his eyes. "Admiral, we are receiving emergency broadcasts from every sector of the Velthari Dominion. The Kreth Syndicate and the Morvax Collective have launched a coordinated attack." Elena felt her blood turn to ice as the reports flooded in. Luna Base destroyed in the first wave. The Mars colonies burning, and Earth beautiful. Ancient Earth surrounded by a fleet of warships that blotted out the sun. "Get me a channel to Earth Command," she ordered. But the communications officer only shook his head with tears streaming down his face. "There is no Earth Command anymore, Admiral. They hit the military installations first, and now they are targeting the civilian centers." The view screen flickered to life with emergency broadcasts from around the planet. Cities vanishing under orbital bombardment. Oceans boiling from the heat of plasma weapons. And millions of voices screaming into the void for help that would never arrive. Elena tried to reach her daughter, sending message after message to their home in New Geneva, but there was no response. She could only watch as the city coordinates flashed red on the tactical display, indicating total destruction. Then one final message came through, weak and broken by static. Maya's face appeared on the screen, scared but trying to be brave the way her mother had taught her. "Mom, there are bright lights in the sky, and everyone is running. But I wanted to tell you that I love you, and I am not scared because you told me to always be brave," and the transmission cut to static. And Elena Vasquez felt something inside her die. Not her hope, not her faith, but something else, her mercy. Around her, the bridge crew wept as they watched humanity's homeworld burn. 12 billion people reduced to ash and glass in a matter of hours, and the Galactic Concord did nothing. The other species watched from their comfortable worlds, sending no aid and offering no protest. They had decided long ago that humanity was growing too fast, becoming too influential. And the old powers had agreed that the young species needed to be removed from the game. The Velthari had provided the fleets. Thousands of warships built in secret over decades. The Kreth had funded the operation with their vast wealth. The Morvax had created the biological weapons that would ensure no human could ever return to the poisoned worlds. And the Concord, that great alliance of civilized species, had simply looked away and pretended not to see the genocide unfolding before their eyes. For 3 terrible weeks, the killing continued. Human colonies fell one by one, their distress calls answered only by more enemy ships. And the population of humanity dropped from tens of billions to mere millions. Elena gathered what ships she could find, leading survivors away from the massacre and into the darkness between stars. They hid in asteroid belts and abandoned mining stations, watching their sensor screens for any sign of pursuit. The final count broke her heart. 2.3 million survivors scattered across the void. Less than 1% of 1% of their species. Hunted like animals by enemies who wanted them erased from existence. She found them in a nameless asteroid belt far from any charted system. Broken ships filled with broken people. Families who had lost everything. Soldiers who had failed to protect their homes. And children who would never see their parents again. They looked to her for answers, for hope. For some reason to keep living when everything they loved had been taken from them. Elena stood before them in the cargo bay of the Prometheus, surrounded by hollow eyes and silent grief. She had no words of comfort, no promises of peace, no gentle reassurances that everything would be all right. Instead, she spoke 7 words that would echo across the centuries and strike fear into the hearts of every species that had watched. Humanity burn. No goodbyes, no mercy, only judgment. The survivors did not cheer. They did not cry. They simply nodded with cold understanding. They had come to the stars with friendship and curiosity, eager to learn and share and grow alongside their galactic neighbors. They had offered peace to every species they met and asked only for the same in return. The galaxy had answered with fire and death, and the screams of children. Now humanity would give its own answer. And the stars themselves would tremble at what they had created. Not victims, not refugees, not a broken species begging for survival. They had become something else entirely. Something that would haunt the nightmares of every civilization that had stood by while innocence burned. They had become judgment itself. Cold and patient and absolutely unstoppable. And they would not rest until every debt was paid in full. Admiral Elena Vasquez looked out at the darkness that had become their home, holding the frozen image of her daughter's face in her memory. She made a silent promise to Maya and to every child who had died in the flames. The galaxy had taught humanity that kindness was weakness and mercy was death. Now humanity would teach the galaxy a lesson of its own. There would be no forgiveness for what had been done. There would be no escape from what was coming. There would only be the long, patient work of vengeance, and when it was finished, the species that had murdered humanity's children would learn the true meaning of fear. The stars had never seemed so dark. But in that darkness, something terrible was being born, and the galaxy was not ready for what humanity was about to become. 10 years passed in silence, and the galaxy forgot about humanity. The Valkyrie Dominion celebrated their victory with grand parades and monuments to their glorious triumph over the human threat that had dared to rise too quickly among the stars. Their emperor declared a new age of prosperity and security. Now that the troublesome species had been removed from existence, the Kreth Syndicate counted their profits from the genocide, having stripped the abandoned human colonies of every valuable resource. They built new trading posts on the ashes of human cities and laughed at how easy it had been to erase an entire civilization. The Morvax Collective archived their biological weapons research, proud of the poisons they had created that would keep human worlds dead for 10,000 years. Their scientists received awards and honors for their contribution to galactic stability, and the Concord continued its meetings and treaties and diplomatic functions, never once mentioning the billions of innocents they had watched die. It was easier to pretend it had never happened, to act as if humanity had simply vanished on its own. But in the darkness between stars, where no sensors could reach and no patrols would ever think to look, something was growing. Admiral Elena Vasquez had led her survivors into the depths of a nebula so dense that light itself could not escape. Here, hidden from the eyes of their enemies, humanity began its transformation. The first year was spent simply surviving, finding food and water and breathable air, repairing damaged ships, and caring for the wounded and traumatized refugees who had lost everything they ever loved. The second year brought organization. Elena divided her people into groups based on their skills, creating teams of engineers, scientists, soldiers, and strategists who would each play a role in what was to come. By the third year, they had established hidden bases throughout the nebula. Hollowed-out asteroids became factories, abandoned moons became training grounds, and the darkness itself became their greatest weapon. Elena stood before her council of survivors, men and women who had once been teachers and doctors and artists but had become something harder and colder. In the years since the genocide, we cannot fight them with what we have, she said, spreading captured alien technology across the table before them. We must become something they have never seen, something they cannot understand, something that strikes fear into their hearts before we ever fire a single weapon. Her chief scientist, Dr. Marcus Webb, had lost his entire family in the attack on Luna Base. Now he worked 20 hours a day without rest, driven by a cold fury that burned brighter than any star. We have studied their technology and found it impressive but predictable, Marcus reported with hollow eyes that had not known sleep in weeks. They follow rules and treaties that limit what they build. But we are no longer part of their concord. We are bound by nothing. The survivors began to build weapons that the Concord had banned centuries ago. Ships that used principles of physics the other species had deemed too dangerous to explore. And armor that could withstand attacks that would vaporize conventional vessels. They called it Project Prometheus, named after the Titan who had stolen fire from the gods. Humanity would steal the fire of the stars themselves and burn their enemies with it. But technology alone would not be enough. The survivors knew they were outnumbered millions to one, and no amount of advanced weapons could overcome such odds through force alone. Elena authorized a program that would have horrified the humanity of old. Genetic modifications that pushed the human body beyond its natural limits. Neural implants that connected soldiers directly to their weapons and ships. And psychological conditioning that removed fear and hesitation from the minds of their warriors. The volunteers who underwent these procedures emerged as something new. Not quite human anymore, but something more soldiers who could fight for days without sleep, who felt no pain and showed no mercy, who moved with a precision that made machines look clumsy. They called themselves the Remnant, and each one carried the names of everyone they had lost burned into their memory. Those names would be their fuel, their motivation, and their curse. Meanwhile, Elena launched a different kind of war. A war of shadows and secrets that the enemy would never see coming. Human agents slipped into alien societies one by one, disguised by advanced holographic technology and years of careful study. They became servants and workers and minor officials, invisible and overlooked, watching and listening and learning. These spies built networks that stretched across the entire galaxy. They discovered every dirty secret the Concord had buried, every crime the Veltri had committed, every lie the Kreth had told, and every atrocity the Morvax had hidden. They learned that humanity was not the first species the Concord had destroyed. There had been others, younger races who had risen too fast and threatened the old powers, erased from history so completely that even their names had been forgotten. This knowledge burned in the hearts of the survivors like acid. They had thought themselves special in their suffering, but now they knew they were simply the latest victims of a galaxy that murdered anyone who dared to challenge the established order. By the 8th year, the Requiem Armada was ready. 300 ships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, crewed by soldiers who had been forged in grief and tempered by hatred. Elena inspected her fleet with pride and sorrow mixed together in her ancient eyes. She was older now, her hair turned white by years of stress and planning, but her resolve had never wavered. Her second in command, Commander Jackson Stone, walked beside her through the hangar bay. He had been a young lieutenant when the genocide began. And now he was one of the deadliest warriors humanity had ever produced. "The crews are ready," Jackson reported in a voice that had lost all warmth years ago. "They have trained for this moment every day since they arrived here. They will not fail." Elena nodded and looked out at the ships that would carry humanity's judgment to the stars. Each vessel bore a name taken from human history, from heroes and legends and fallen cities that would never be rebuilt. "We gave the galaxy every chance to show us mercy," she said quietly, almost to herself. "We came to them with open hands and hopeful hearts, asking only for friendship and understanding." She turned to face her commander with eyes that had seen too much death to ever cry again. "They answered with the murder of our children and the burning of our worlds. They watched us die and did nothing. They thought we would simply disappear into history like all the others." A cold smile crossed her weathered face as she activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "But they forgot something important about humanity. We do not disappear. We do not surrender. We do not forget." Her voice echoed through every ship in the Armada, reaching the ears of soldiers who had waited 10 long years for this moment. "The time for hiding is over. The time for building is finished. Now begins the time for judgment." The engines of 300 ships roared to life, filling the nebula with light and thunder. Humanity was emerging from the darkness at last, and the galaxy that had tried to murder them was about to learn the true cost of its cruelty. The border world of Nexus 7 was a quiet place, a Valkyrie military outpost on the edge of Dominion space where nothing exciting ever happened. Commander Thrall of the Valkyrie Defense Force considered his assignment here to be a punishment. He had offended a noble family at court, and now he spent his days watching empty space and dreaming of the glory he would never achieve. The night it happened began like any other. His soldiers patrolled their routes. His sensors showed nothing unusual, and he was preparing to retire to his quarters for another boring evening. Then the lights went out. Every system on the base failed at once. Power, communications, sensors, even the backup generators that were supposed to be impossible to disable. Thrall stumbled through the darkness, shouting orders that no one could hear, searching for any of his soldiers, but finding only silence. When the emergency lights finally flickered back to life 3 hours later, Thrall found himself alone. Every single one of his 5,000 soldiers had vanished without a trace, without a sound, without leaving so much as a drop of blood behind. But they had left a message. Carved into the stone of the central plaza in letters 10 meters tall was a single word, written in every language the galaxy knew. "Remember the Valkyrie High." Command dismissed the incident as a malfunction combined with desertion. Soldiers sometimes abandoned their posts on boring border worlds, and the strange message was probably just vandalism. But then it happened again. A supply convoy disappeared in the Kreth trade lanes. 12 ships carrying weapons and ammunition simply gone from existence. The search parties found nothing but empty space and a repeating signal that played a recording of human children laughing. A Morvax research station went dark for 6 hours. And when communication was restored, every scientist aboard had been replaced by holographic projectors showing images of burning human cities. The real scientists were never found. Across the galaxy, fear began to spread. Something was out there in the darkness, something that struck without warning and vanished without explanation. The Valkyrie Emperor demanded answers from his admirals, but they had none to give. Their sensors showed nothing, their patrols found nothing, and their intelligence networks reported nothing unusual. Then the psychological warfare began. Valkyrie soldiers started receiving messages on their personal communication devices. Recordings of the final transmissions from Earth, the screams of dying humans, the pleading voices of children begging for help that never came. The messages always ended the same way. "We remember, do you?" Kreth traders found their secret accounts exposed, their hidden crimes broadcast across public networks. Business dealings that had been buried for centuries suddenly appeared on every screen in every marketplace. Morvac citizens woke to find the names of human victims written on the walls of their cities. Billions of names covering every surface, appearing overnight without any explanation of how they got there. The populations began to panic. There were riots in the Valtteri cities, protests in the Kreth markets, and mass hysteria in the Morvax colonies. And still no one knew who was responsible. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session to address the growing crisis. Representatives from every species demanded answers, but no one could provide them. It was during this session that a single ship appeared in orbit above the Concord capital world. Every sensor array in the system had missed it. One moment the sky was empty, and the next moment a vessel of unknown design hung in the darkness like a ghost. The ship was black, so black that it seemed to absorb the light around it. Its shape was angular and aggressive, covered in weapons that did not match any known technology. Before the panicked defense forces could respond, the ship began to broadcast on every frequency in the galaxy. The signal reached every planet, every station, every ship, and every personal device across all of known space. The face that appeared on the screens was human, but it was not a face anyone recognized. It was a woman with white hair and eyes that held no warmth, no fear, and no mercy. "You do not know me," Admiral Elena Vasquez said in a voice as cold as the void between stars. "But I know all of you. I know what you did 10 years ago. And I know what you have done to others before us." The galaxy watched in frozen horror as the woman continued. "You killed our children in their beds. You burned our cities while we begged for peace. You poisoned our world so that nothing could ever live there again." Her voice never rose above a calm, measured tone, but somehow that made it more terrifying than any scream. "And you," she said, looking directly into the camera as if she could see every guilty soul watching. "You did nothing. You watched us die and called it politics. You let them murder billions and pretended it was not your concern." The silence that followed was absolute. Entire worlds held their breath, waiting for what would come next. "We did not die," Elena said simply. "We waited, we watched, we learned, and now we have returned." The transmission showed images of the Requiem Armada, hundreds of ships emerging from the darkness like a nightmare made real. Weapons powered up, targeting systems activated, and soldiers standing ready for war. "This is not an invasion," Elena continued. "This is not a war, this is judgment." She leaned forward, and for a moment her mask of cold control cracked to show the grief and rage that burned beneath. "You taught us that kindness is weakness. You taught us that mercy is death. You taught us that the galaxy only respects those who have the power to destroy." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow echoed across 1 billion screens. "We have learned your lesson well." The transmission ended, and chaos erupted across the galaxy. The Valtteri scrambled their fleets, the Kreth locked down their borders, and the Morvax began evacuating their outer colonies. But it was already too late. The Requiem Armada struck 3 targets simultaneously: a Valtteri shipyard, a Kreth banking center, and a Morvax weapons facility. Each attack lasted exactly 11 minutes. 1 minute for every year of Maya Vasquez's life. When the fires cooled and the survivors took count of the damage, they found something that chilled them to their core. Not a single civilian had been harmed, not a single innocent life had been taken. Only the guilty had died. The message was clear. Humanity had not come to commit genocide. They had come to deliver justice. And they would not stop until every debt was paid. The Valtteri Emperor sat on his golden throne and watched his empire crumble. For 300 years his family had ruled the Dominion with absolute power. They had conquered worlds, crushed rebellions, and eliminated any species that dared to threaten their supremacy. Now the humans had returned. and nothing could stop them. His fleets were the mightiest in the galaxy, or so he had believed. 1,000 warships crewed by the finest soldiers in known space. Armed with weapons that had never failed, the Requiem Armada destroyed 200 of them in a single day. The human ships moved in ways that should have been impossible. They appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating force, and vanished before his commanders could even target them. His admirals sent him reports filled with terror and confusion. They described weapons that turned shields into energy that fed the enemy, ships that phased through solid matter, and soldiers who could not be killed no matter how many times they were shot. But the worst part was the precision. The humans did not bomb cities or slaughter civilians. They targeted only military installations, only government buildings, only the specific individuals who had planned and executed the genocide. Every death had a name attached to it. Every explosion came with a recording of exactly why that person had been chosen. The galaxy watched as the Velthari learned what it meant to face an enemy that knew all their secrets and feared nothing. Admiral Vasquez led the assault on the throne world herself. Her flagship, the Prometheus, descended through the atmosphere like a falling star. The Imperial Guard fought bravely, but hopelessly. Their weapons could not penetrate human armor. Their tactics could not counter human speed. And their numbers meant nothing against an enemy that had spent 10 years preparing for this exact moment. Elena walked through the burning ruins of the Imperial Palace with slow, deliberate steps. Her soldiers had already secured the building and captured the Emperor's high command. She found them huddled in the throne room, surrounded by broken weapons and fallen guards. The Emperor himself sat on his golden chair, too proud to run, but too afraid to speak. Elena stopped before them and pulled out a small holographic device. She activated it, and the image of a young girl appeared floating in the air. Maya Vasquez smiled at her mother from 11 years in the past, frozen forever in a moment of innocent joy. She wanted to understand your species, Elena said, in a voice that held no emotion. She thought if she could learn about other cultures, she could help bring peace to the galaxy. The Emperor tried to speak, to offer excuses or apologies or bargains for his life. But Elena silenced him with a raised hand. "You do not get to speak," she said. "You had your chance to speak 10 years ago when your ships surrounded our world. You chose silence then, so you will have silence now." The sentence she passed was worse than death. The Emperor and his high command were placed in stasis pods, programmed to keep them conscious but unable to move. These pods were then launched toward the nearest black hole, where they would fall for centuries, aware of every moment of their endless descent into oblivion. As the pods vanished into the darkness, Elena felt no satisfaction, no relief, no sense of closure. Maya was still dead, and nothing could change that. But the judgment was not finished. The Kreth Syndicate fell next, brought down not by weapons, but by information. Human agents had spent years gathering evidence of every crime the Syndicate had ever committed. Slave trading, drug manufacturing, assassination contracts, and the funding of genocide. This information was released simultaneously to every media outlet in the galaxy. Trillions of beings watched as the Syndicate's leaders were exposed as monsters, who had profited from suffering for centuries. Their banks collapsed as customers fled. Their partners abandoned them. Their own soldiers refused to fight for masters whose crimes were now known to all. The Syndicate lords were given a choice: face trial before the human survivors, or face the void. Most chose the void. They knew what they had done, and they knew no trial would show them mercy. Those who chose to face justice were brought before a court of human judges. They were not executed, for that would have been too quick. Instead, they were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives working to repair the damage they had caused. They would rebuild human colonies, tend human memorials, and speak to human children about the crimes they had committed. They would live forever with the weight of their guilt. Unable to escape or forget, the Morvax Collective received a different kind of judgment. They had created the biological weapons that poisoned human worlds, ensuring that no one could ever live there again. Their scientists had designed poisons so deadly that even the soil itself became toxic. Humanity responded with precision that terrified the collective. Their agents had identified every single individual involved in the weapons program, from the lead scientists to the bureaucrats who had approved the funding. One by one, these individuals were taken. They vanished from their homes, their offices, their laboratories, without warning and without trace. They were not killed. Instead, they were given modified versions of their own weapons, poisons that caused no death but endless suffering. Their families were forced to watch, just as human families had been forced to watch their worlds burn. This was not cruelty for its own sake, but a lesson that would be passed down through generations. The Morvax would never forget what their scientists had done, and they would never allow such weapons to be created again. Finally, the Galactic Concord faced its reckoning. Humanity did not attack the other species who had stood by during the genocide. They did not burn their cities or kill their people. Instead, they exposed every secret the Concord had buried, every species that had been quietly eliminated, every inconvenient truth that had been hidden, every lie that had been told to maintain the illusion of a civilized galaxy. The Concord collapsed under the weight of its own hypocrisy. Species that had trusted each other for centuries now looked at their allies with suspicion and fear. Alina addressed the shattered remains of the galactic government one final time. She stood before representatives of 47 species and spoke words that would reshape civilization itself. "You are not innocent," she said. "You watched us die and did nothing. You knew what was happening and chose to look away." The representatives could not meet her eyes. "But we will not destroy you," Elena continued. "We will not become what you feared we would become. We will not murder your children as you murdered ours." She paused and let her words sink in. "Instead, you will live with the knowledge of what you allowed to happen. You will remember our faces and our names. You will tell your children what was done in your name." Her voice hardened. "And if any species ever again attempts what was done to us, you will stand against them or face our judgment yourselves." The representatives agreed to everything. They had no choice. Humanity had proven that it could destroy any civilization it chose. Now it was proving that it could choose not to. And somehow, that was even more terrifying. 50 years had passed since humanity delivered its judgment upon the stars. The Velfari Dominion existed only in history books. Their empire had shattered into 100 small nations, each one haunted by the memory of what their ancestors had done. The Kreth Syndicate had been replaced by a cooperative trading network that operated under strict ethical guidelines. Any merchant who tried to return to the old ways of exploitation found themselves quickly corrected by human observers. The Morvax Collective had become the galaxy's most vocal opponents of weapons development. Their children were taught from birth about the horrors their species had once created, and they carried that shame like a sacred burden. The Galactic Concord was gone, replaced by a new alliance called the Remembrance Compact. At its center stood humanity, no longer victims but guardians of a galaxy that had tried to erase them. Admiral Elena Vasquez was old now, 112 years of age, but still alive thanks to the medical technology her people had developed during their years in hiding. She sat in her quarters aboard the Prometheus, staring at the holographic image of her daughter that she had carried through 5 decades of war and peace. Maya still smiled at her, frozen forever at 11 years old, never knowing that her death had sparked a transformation that changed the course of galactic history. A knock came at her door, and Elena straightened in her chair as Commander Jackson Stone entered. He too had aged, his hair now gray and his face marked by the years. But his loyalty had never wavered. "The council is ready for you," he said gently. "It is time." Elena nodded and rose slowly from her seat. Her body ached with the weight of years, but her mind remained sharp and her will remained strong. She made her way to the great hall of the Remembrance Compact, where representatives of every species in the galaxy waited to hear her final address. This was her last official act as Admiral of the Requiem Armada. She had decided to step down and pass the burden to younger shoulders. But first, she had one more message to deliver. The hall fell silent as she approached the podium. Behind her, massive screens showed images of Earth as it had once been. Blue and green and full of life. "I have spent 50 years thinking about what happened to our species," Elena began in a voice that still carried strength despite her age. 50 years remembering the fires that consumed our world, and the screams of our children. She paused and looked out at the assembled representatives. Species who had once watched humanity burn now hung on her every word. "For a long time, I believed that revenge was the only answer. I believed that we had to become monsters to destroy the monsters who had hurt us. I believed that mercy was weakness and forgiveness was surrender." Her voice softened. "I was wrong." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Elena raised her hand for silence. "Do not misunderstand me. What we did was necessary. The judgment we delivered was just. The guilty were punished, and the galaxy was forced to confront the truth it had buried for so long." She turned to look at the image of Earth floating behind her. But revenge alone cannot rebuild what was lost. Hatred alone cannot raise our children or restore our cities. If all we become is a species of executioners, then we have betrayed everything our ancestors believed in. Elena faced the crowd once more with fire in her ancient eyes. Humanity came to the stars with hope and curiosity. We wanted to learn, to grow, to make friends with species we had never imagined. That dream was stolen from us, but it does not have to die. She gestured to the younger humans in the audience. The generation born after the genocide, raised in the shadow of loss but reaching toward the light. Our children deserve better than endless war. They deserve a galaxy where kindness is not weakness and mercy is not death. They deserve to fulfill the dream that was stolen from us. Her voice rose with conviction. We will not forget what was done to us. We will never stop protecting the innocent from those who would harm them. But we will also not lose ourselves in vengeance. She took a deep breath and spoke her final words as Admiral. From this day forward, humanity's mission is not judgment but guardianship. We will stand as protectors of any species that faces extinction. We will be the shield that we wish someone had been for us. The hall erupted in applause, and Elena allowed herself a small smile. Later that night, she returned to the ruins of Earth. The planet remained uninhabitable, poisoned by weapons designed to ensure nothing would ever grow there again. But humanity had built something beautiful among the ashes, a memorial unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. A structure of light and crystal that rose from the dead surface like a monument to everything that had been lost. Carved into its walls were the names of every human who had died in the genocide. Billions of names stretching across kilometers of polished stone, each one representing a life that had been stolen. At the center of the memorial, a single flame burned. It had been lit 50 years ago and had never gone out, a symbol of humanity's refusal to be extinguished. Elena placed her hand on the wall beside her daughter's name. Maya Vasquez, beloved daughter, dreamer, lost at age 11. I hope I made you proud, she whispered to the name in the stone. I hope you understand why I did what I did. There was no answer, of course. There never would be. But as Elena stood in the silence of the memorial, surrounded by the names of the fallen, she felt something she had not felt in 50 years. Peace. Not forgiveness. Not closure. Not the end of grief. But a quiet acceptance that she had done everything she could. Humanity had survived. Humanity had delivered justice. And now humanity had chosen to become something better than the galaxy that had tried to destroy them. The stars no longer seemed so dark. And somewhere in the light of the memorial flame, Elena could almost imagine Maya smiling at her, proud of what her mother had become. The final inscription at the base of the memorial said everything that needed to be said. Words that would be read by every species in the galaxy for as long as civilization existed. We offered friendship, you chose annihilation, we offered peace, you chose extinction, we gave you every chance to show mercy, you gave us none. So we became your judgment, not from hatred but from memory. Let this stand. Eternal humanity remembers, and humanity endures. The story of humanity's fall and rise would be told for 10,000 years. Children of every species would learn about the genocide and the judgment that followed. They would learn that the smallest species could become the mightiest when pushed too far. They would learn that silence in the face of evil is itself a form of evil. And they would learn that even the deepest wound can heal. If you choose to let light back into the darkness, Elena Vasquez died 3 years later, peacefully in her sleep. Surrounded by the grandchildren of survivors who had become her family, her last words were simple. Tell Maya, I am coming home. The galaxy mourned her passing, and her name was added to the memorial beside her daughter. Together forever, mother and child. Symbols of everything humanity had lost and everything humanity had become. This was the legacy of the genocide, not endless war, not eternal vengeance, but a galaxy transformed by the memory of those who had suffered. Humanity had been forged in fire and emerged as something new. Something terrifying to those who wished harm, but something beautiful to those who needed protection. No goodbyes, no mercy, only judgment, and then, finally, hope, the end.
The stars had never seemed so cold as they did on the night humanity first learned its place in the universe. 300 years before this story begins, the exploration vessel Prometheus pushed beyond the edges of the solar system and discovered something that changed everything. They found intelligent life, not simple bacteria or floating microbes, but thinking beings who had built great empires across the galaxy, while humans were still learning to grow crops and build simple villages. The Galactic Concord was the name of the alliance that ruled the stars. 12 ancient races had formed this mighty organization thousands of years before the first human being ever existed. They had conquered sickness and extended their lives for centuries. They had bent the laws of nature to serve their wishes. They had spread across 10,000 worlds and claimed ownership of everything they touched. When humans arrived on the galactic stage, the Concord welcomed them with smiles that hid cruel laughter. The elder races looked at these small, soft creatures who lived barely 100 years and decided they were not worth taking seriously. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had served humanity in the Concord Assembly for 30 long years. She remembered her first day in the magnificent chamber where representatives of 12 civilizations gathered to make decisions that shaped the fate of billions. She had been young and full of hope. She had prepared beautiful speeches about friendship and working together. Nobody had cared to listen. The HFY delegate was a massive creature who stood twice as tall as any human. He had 4 powerful arms and scales that changed color like oil floating on water. When Elena tried to introduce herself, he glanced at her briefly and turned away without saying a single word. The Thessian representative belonged to a species that looked like elegant birds with feathers made of pure silver. She had laughed softly when Elena attempted to address the assembly, as if watching a pet try to speak. The other delegates had simply pretended Elena did not exist. They continued their important discussions while she stood alone, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her entire life. They are primitive creatures, the Archon of the HFY had announced during that first assembly meeting. Their lives are short and their minds are limited, We shall permit them to observe our proceedings as a kindness, but nothing more than that." Alina had forced herself to smile. She had nodded her head as if grateful for being allowed to witness their greatness. She had walked to the back of the enormous chamber and taken her seat in a small chair designed for observers who held no power and deserved no respect. That was how it began. Over the following 30 years, Alina watched and documented everything that happened to her people. She saw the HFY Empire claim 7 human colony worlds as their own property. They called these planets resource territories and gave the human settlers a simple choice: leave with nothing but the clothes on your backs, or stay and work as servants under HFY masters. Most colonists chose to leave. They abandoned homes they had spent years building and farms they had planted with their own hands. They left behind everything they owned and fled into space with nothing. Those who chose to stay were never heard from again. Alina filed requests asking about their fate. The HFY never bothered to respond. She also documented the activities of the Thessian hegemony. The Thessians considered themselves the greatest scientists in the galaxy. They were especially fascinated by human brains, which they found strange and interesting. Thessian research vessels would appear near human settlements without any warning. They would take people, sometimes dozens at a time, for what they called cognitive studies. Alina received reports from the few survivors who were eventually returned. They came back with pieces of their minds missing. Some could not remember their own names. Others failed to recognize their own children. Many could not speak or walk or feed themselves. Alina filed formal complaints about these kidnappings. She used respectful language and followed every proper procedure. She requested investigations and hearings and justice. The response was always the same. Scientific research falls under protected activities, the conquered officials told her. The Thessians have done nothing wrong. Over 30 years, Alina filed 2,847 official grievances. Each one documented a specific crime committed against human beings. Each one followed the correct format and used polite, diplomatic language. Each one asked for peaceful solutions to terrible problems. Every single grievance was rejected. The conquered cannot involve itself in minor territorial disputes, they said when she reported stolen colonies. Humanity must learn to handle its own internal conflicts. They announced when human merchant ships were attacked and their crews sold into slavery. Perhaps if humans were more careful, these unfortunate incidents would not occur, they suggested when entire settlements were destroyed. Alina kept smiling through all of it. She kept nodding politely. She kept attending assembly meetings where nobody acknowledged her presence. She kept filing her reports and following procedures that accomplished nothing. But she also kept records of her own. In her private quarters aboard the human diplomatic station, Alina maintained a secret file she named the Ledger. Every crime against humanity went into this file. Every insult and every atrocity was carefully recorded. She gathered names and dates and locations. She collected testimony from survivors and evidence from crime scenes. She built a mountain of documentation that grew taller with each passing year. Her superiors on Earth knew about the ledger. They encouraged her to keep adding to it. "Be patient," they told her during their secret communications. "Document everything. The time will come when all of this information will be needed." Alina did not fully understand what they meant. She did not know what plans humanity was making in secret, but she trusted her leaders. She believed that her suffering served a purpose, even if she could not see that purpose yet. Meanwhile, the elder races became bolder in their cruelty. At one assembly meeting, the HFY Archon proposed limiting human ships to a tiny region of space. He argued that humanity was not mature enough to travel freely among the stars. "They multiply like insects," the Archon declared, his voice filled with disgust. "If we do not contain them now, they will spread everywhere and contaminate the galaxy with their presence." The proposal passed without a single vote against it. Every delegate from every elder race agreed that humans should be caged like animals. Alina sat in her observer's chair and wrote down every word spoken that day. She noted which delegates laughed at the Archon's insults. She recorded which ones nodded in agreement with his hateful speech. She added everything to the ledger. At another meeting, a Thessian scientist presented research findings to the assembly. The presentation included images of human test subjects who had been cut open while they were still alive and conscious. The scientist described their screaming as an interesting pattern of sounds and wondered whether humans experienced pain the same way real species did. The assembly had applauded this presentation. Delegates had congratulated the scientist on her important work. Alina had clapped along with everyone else. She had smiled her diplomatic smile. Later that night, alone in her quarters, she had wept until no more tears would come. Then she had dried her eyes and added the presentation to the ledger. Young members of the human diplomatic team often asked Alina how she survived. How could she sit there day after day, absorbing insults and cruelties, and never once fight back? "Fighting is not my assignment," Alina would explain. "My assignment is to watch and remember and record. When the time comes for fighting, others will handle that responsibility." They thought she was broken. They believed decades of abuse had destroyed her spirit until nothing remained but empty obedience. They could not have been more wrong. Alina Vasquez was not broken. She was not defeated. She was waiting. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, in places the elder races never thought to examine, humanity was waiting with her. Humanity was building. Humanity was preparing. The conquered saw a species of weak, short-lived creatures who smiled at insults and responded to violence with paperwork. They saw animals that could be hunted without consequence. They never wondered why those animals kept smiling. They never asked what humanity might be planning during all those quiet years. They never imagined that patience could be a weapon. But patience was exactly that, and humanity had been sharpening that weapon for 300 years. The galaxy would soon discover what happened when humanity decided the time for patience had ended. That day was coming closer with every atrocity the elder races committed. They just did not know it yet. Captain Marcus Chen stood on the command deck of the UEN Steadfast and stared at the empty darkness where a human freighter had been floating just 6 hours earlier. The Krethvi raiders had struck again. They had appeared from nowhere, disabled the merchant vessel with a single shot, and stripped it of everything valuable. Then they had taken the crew of 47 men and women and vanished back into the darkness of space. By the time the Steadfast arrived at the location, nothing remained except scattered debris and a fatting distress signal that nobody would ever answer. "Did anyone survive?" Marcus asked his sensor officer, even though he already knew what the answer would be. "No survivors detected, Captain. The escape pods were launched, but they are all empty. The raiders took everyone aboard." Marcus let out a long, tired breath. This was the 12th attack on human ships this month alone. 12 vessels lost, more than 500 human beings stolen and carried away to unknown destinations where unknown horrors awaited them. He had sent 17 requests for assistance to the Galactic Concord. 17 carefully written messages asking for protection, for patrols, for any kind of help at all. The reply was always identical. The conquered cannot intervene in minor territorial disputes. Humanity must learn to defend its own merchant vessels. Minor territorial disputes. That was what they called the organized hunting of human ships. That was how they dismissed the kidnapping and enslavement of human citizens. Marcus walked back to his captain's chair and pulled up the latest reports. Human patrol ships were stretched impossibly thin across the outer reach. They had barely 100 small frigates trying to protect thousands of merchant vessels, crossing millions of kilometers of hostile space. It was never enough. It would never be enough. But complaining accomplished nothing. Marcus had learned that painful lesson many years ago. All he could do was keep trying, keep patrolling, keep hoping that somehow things would change. He was preparing to order a return course to the nearest supply station when his communications officer suddenly jumped up from her seat. "Captain, we are receiving a priority emergency signal. It is coming from the colony ship New Haven." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. The New Haven was one of the largest colony transports in the human fleet. It carried 12,000 civilian passengers fleeing the failed settlement on Kepler-22. The life support systems on that colony had broken down beyond repair, forcing everyone to evacuate. 12,000 innocent people, and 3,000 of those passengers were children. "What is their situation?" Marcus demanded. "A Thessian science vessel has intercepted them, Captain. The Thessians are demanding that the New Haven surrender all passengers for cognitive research." The officer paused, her face turning pale. "They are firing warning shots. The New Haven has no weapons to defend itself." "Change course immediately. Maximum engine power. Push beyond safety limits if necessary." The Steadfast jumped into faster-than-light travel, straining its engines to dangerous levels. Marcus stood at the front of the bridge, watching stars blur past the viewports, silently begging his ship to go faster. They were 4 hours away at maximum speed. 4 hours of helpless traveling while 12,000 defenseless people faced their worst nightmare. "Should we contact the Concord for emergency assistance?" one of his younger officers suggested. Marcus almost laughed at the idea. The Concord considers Thessian research to be a protected activity. They have made that very clear. They would refuse to help even if they could arrive in time. Silence fell over the bridge. Everyone knew he spoke the truth. For 4 terrible hours, the crew of the Steadfast could do nothing but wait. They received updates from the New Haven, and each message was worse than the one before. The Thessians had forced their way aboard. They were separating families, pulling children away from screaming parents. They were marching people onto their research vessel in groups of 50. The messages described scenes of terror and chaos, passengers begging for mercy, children crying for their mothers, Thessian soldiers ignoring all pleas as they methodically processed their human cargo. Then the messages stopped completely. When the Steadfast finally reached the coordinates, Marcus found the New Haven drifting silently through space. No lights glowed in its windows. No signals came from its communication systems. The great ship hung dark and cold against the stars like a tomb. "Any life readings?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "None, Captain. The ship appears to be completely without life." Marcus assembled a boarding team and led it personally. He needed to see what had happened with his own eyes. He needed to bear witness. The corridors of the New Haven were empty and silent as death. Personal belongings lay scattered everywhere, dropped by people who had no time to hold onto possessions. Family photographs and children's toys and half-eaten meals covered the floors. Little pieces of 12,000 interrupted lives. They discovered the first bodies in the medical bay. The Thessians had converted the New Haven's own medical facilities into a research laboratory. Human beings lay on operating tables with their skulls cut open and their brains partially removed. Medical instruments still protruded from wounds that had never been closed. The expressions frozen on the victims' faces made clear that many had been fully awake and aware during the procedures. They had felt everything. They had experienced every moment of what was done to them. Marcus forced himself to continue moving. He activated his recording equipment and documented everything he saw, every body, every wound, every terrible detail. In the main cargo bay, they found the children. Marcus Chen had served as a soldier for more than 20 years. He had witnessed combat and bloodshed and death. He thought nothing could shock him anymore. He was wrong. The Thessians had been particularly interested in studying young human brains. They wanted to understand how human intelligence developed during childhood. They had collected samples from over 3,000 young test subjects. None of those subjects had survived the collection process. One of Marcus's officers collapsed to his knees and was sick. Another turned away and began sobbing uncontrollably. Even the most experienced soldiers in the boarding party could not maintain their composure. Marcus stood frozen in place. He could not move. He could not think. He could only stare at the horror surrounding him. He did not know how much time passed before he recovered enough to activate his communicator. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, his voice sounding hollow and distant even to his own ears. "I am transmitting my recordings to you now. Please add them to the ledger." A long silence followed before Elena responded. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of similar reports. "Received, Captain. I am adding it to the file." "How many more?" Marcus asked. "How many more times do we document their crimes while doing nothing to stop them?" "I do not know the answer," Elena admitted, "but I intend to find out tonight. There is an important call I need to make." The connection ended. Marcus ordered his crew to begin the heartbreaking work of recovering the bodies. Every single victim deserved to be returned to whatever family might still be waiting for them. Every single name deserved to be remembered. As he supervised the grim work, Marcus made a silent vow. This atrocity would not be forgotten. This crime would not go unpunished. Someday, the Thessians and the HFY and all the elder races who had laughed at human suffering would discover the price of their cruelty. He could not know that the day of reckoning was much closer than he dared to hope. That night, in her quarters far across the galaxy, Ambassador Elena Vasquez reviewed the ledger one final time. 140,000 documented crimes stretched across 300 years of history. Raids and kidnappings and murders and experiments. A complete record of everything the galaxy had done to humanity. She opened a secure, encrypted channel to United Earth Command. "How long have our forces been prepared?" she asked. The reply came from Admiral Yuki Tanaka, commander of military assets that Elena had never been officially told existed. 60 years, Ambassador. We have been building ships and training soldiers and developing weapons for 60 years. Everything is ready. Everyone is ready. We have only been waiting for authorization to begin." Elena closed her eyes and thought of the cargo bay filled with dead children. She thought of all the colonists dragged from their homes. She thought of every forced smile she had worn while monsters laughed in her face. "Authorization is granted," she said firmly. "Tell everyone to prepare for immediate action. Patience is no longer something we can afford." "Understood, Ambassador. Operation Long Memory is now officially active. The galaxy will learn what happens when humanity stops asking nicely." Elena ended the transmission and looked out at the cold, distant stars. Somewhere out there, the elder races were sleeping peacefully in their comfortable beds. They felt completely safe in their assumed superiority. They had no idea what was about to happen. They had pushed humanity beyond the breaking point. They had confused silence with helplessness and patience with cowardice. They were about to learn just how terribly wrong they had been. The quiet species had finally found its voice. And when that voice spoke, the entire galaxy would hear it. The Galactic Concord Assembly Hall had never appeared more magnificent than it did on the morning of the millennial celebration. 1,000 years had passed since the 12 elder races created their great alliance. 1,000 years of what they proudly called peace and progress. 1,000 years of galactic civilization spreading its influence across countless star systems. Delegates from every member species filled the enormous circular chamber. The Krethvi contingent occupied their traditional section, their multicolored scales polished until they gleamed like precious gems. The Thessians perched on their elevated platforms, silver feathers arranged in elaborate patterns that communicated status and authority. Representatives of 10 other ancient civilizations sat in their assigned positions, each species proud of its role in maintaining galactic order. And at the very back of the chamber, in the small, uncomfortable chair reserved for species who did not matter, sat Ambassador Elena Vasquez of United Earth. She had dressed with special care for this particular occasion. Her diplomatic uniform was perfectly pressed and spotlessly clean. Her gray hair was arranged in a simple, dignified style. She looked exactly as she had looked for the past 30 years, patient, quiet, and easy to ignore. But something was different about her today. Something had changed behind her calm expression. The Archon of the Krethvi rose from his seat to deliver the opening speech. He was an impressive figure, towering over representatives of most other species. His 4 muscular arms spread wide in a dramatic gesture of welcome. "Fellow members of our glorious Concord," he began, his deep voice echoing through the vast hall. "We have gathered here today to celebrate 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. Under the wise guidance of our alliance, the galaxy has flourished beyond all expectation. Order has been established across 10,000 worlds. Lesser species have been brought into the light of proper civilization." He paused to accept the applause that rippled through the chamber. "I wish to specifically acknowledge our recent productive expansion into the Outer Reach territories. New resource zones have been secured for the benefit of all Concord members. New populations have been brought under appropriate management. The future of our great alliance has never looked more promising." Elena listened as the Archon described the theft of human colony worlds as productive expansion. She heard him refer to enslaved human beings as populations under appropriate management. She watched delegates from a dozen species nod and smile in approval of these carefully chosen words. And then she rose to her feet. The entire chamber fell instantly silent. Observers were not permitted to stand during official proceedings. Observers were not allowed to interrupt addresses. In 1,000 years of Concord history, no observer had ever dared to break these sacred rules. The Archon stared at Elena with a mixture of surprise and growing anger. "What is the meaning of this outrageous behavior? Return to your seat immediately." "I invoke the right of testimony," Elena announced. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying easily across the silent hall. "This right is granted under Article 7 of the original Concord Charter to any species that wishes to present a formal grievance against a member state." Confused murmurs spread through the assembly. The right of testimony was ancient history, a relic from the earliest days of the Concord. It had been included centuries ago to make primitive newcomers feel important and included. Nobody had actually used it in over 800 years. The Thessian delegate leaned forward, her silver feathers fluttering with irritation. "That provision is purely ceremonial. It has no real meaning in modern proceedings." "Perhaps you are correct," Elena replied calmly. "However, the right has never been officially removed from the Charter. It still exists in the legal code, and I am invoking it right now, as is my privilege." The delegates exchanged uncertain glances. What should they do? This human was disrupting their important celebration, but she was technically following proper legal procedure. Finally, the Thessian waved one dismissive wing. "Very well. Present your testimony if you must. You have exactly 1 hour to speak, though I cannot possibly imagine what grievance your insignificant species could raise that would concern this distinguished assembly." Elena smiled, but it was not the diplomatic smile she had practiced for 3 decades. This smile was something entirely different. This smile belonged to a woman who had waited a very long time for exactly this moment. "I will not require an hour," she said. "In fact, I will need very little time. But before I begin my testimony, I would like to share something important with everyone present in this chamber. She touched a control on her personal communicator. Instantly, every display screen in the assembly hall flickered and changed. The proud Concord emblem vanished, replaced by something the delegates had never seen before. The ledger appeared on every screen in the chamber. 140,000 documented atrocities began scrolling past. Names and dates and locations filled the displays. Images and recordings and survivor testimonies appeared one after another. 300 years of crimes against humanity were suddenly visible for all to witness. "What is this material?" the Archon demanded. His scales had shifted to an angry red color. "This is everything," Alina replied. "Every raid conducted against human merchant vessels, every colony stolen from human settlers, every citizen kidnapped for Thessian experiments, every child murdered in the name of scientific research." She paused, allowing the images to continue scrolling across the screens. "For 300 years, humanity has petitioned the conquered for justice. We have filed grievances through every proper channel. We have requested hearings and investigations. We have followed every procedure designed for peaceful resolution of disputes." Her voice grew harder with each word. "And what did we receive in response? Dismissal, contempt, mockery. You called us primitive and weak. You stole our worlds and kidnapped our people and murdered our children. And when we complained, you told us to be grateful that you permitted us to exist at all." The chamber had become completely silent. Every delegate stared at the screens showing evidence of crimes they had thought would never be exposed. Some looked angry, others appeared uncomfortable. A few seemed genuinely ashamed of what they were witnessing. "We asked for mercy," Alina continued. "We begged to be treated as equals. We requested, again and again, that you simply recognize us as beings worthy of basic respect." She shook her head slowly. "You refused every request. You ignored every appeal, and so we have stopped asking." The Archon had regained some of his composure. He drew himself up to his full impressive height. "This theatrical display is meaningless. What do you expect to accomplish here? Do you believe that showing us images will somehow change anything? You have no power in this chamber. You have no military forces. You have nothing but words." Alina looked at him with an expression that almost resembled pity. "You truly believe that, do you not? You have spent 300 years watching us file paperwork and attend meetings and smile at your insults. You convinced yourselves that we were harmless. You decided that our patience meant we were simply incapable of defending ourselves." She touched another control on her communicator. "Allow me to correct that serious misunderstanding. Across the entire galaxy, in positions the conquered had never thought to monitor, in locations the elder races had never imagined anyone would hide, something began to move. Warning alarms started sounding throughout the assembly hall. Delegates reached frantically for their own communication devices, receiving urgent reports from their homeworlds and military bases. "What is happening?" the Thessian delegate shrieked. Her carefully arranged feathers were now in complete disarray. Alina's smile grew wider. "While humanity was smiling politely and filing our useless grievances, we were also building. We studied your technology and learned to improve upon it. We constructed hidden shipyards in asteroid fields and inside hollowed-out moons. We trained soldiers and scientists and engineers. We developed weapons you cannot imagine. We prepared for the day when patience would no longer be possible." She looked around the chamber, meeting the frightened eyes of every delegate. "That day has arrived." "You are attempting to deceive us," the Archon growled. "Humanity does not possess the capability to threaten the conquered." 2 hours ago I would have agreed with your assessment, Alina admitted. "But 2 hours ago I transmitted the authorization to begin Operation Long Memory. At this very moment, human vessels are emerging from concealed positions throughout conquered territory. Your fleets are being surrounded. Your stations are being watched. Your homeworlds are under observation. She let that information sink into their minds. We have never wanted war. We still do not want war. But we are finished dying quietly while you debate whether we deserve to live. The assembly hall erupted into complete chaos. Delegates shouted at each other and at Alina. Security guards moved toward her position. Alina remained perfectly calm. She had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. She would not allow panic to ruin it now. "You face a choice," she announced. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You can listen to what humanity has to say. You can review the evidence of your crimes and discuss appropriate consequences. You can work with us to create a galaxy where every species is treated with basic dignity." She paused for one heartbeat. "Or you can choose to fight, and you can discover exactly how much we have been preparing during our 300 years of patient, silent waiting." The chamber fell quiet again. The delegates looked at each other with expressions of uncertainty and growing fear. They had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. They had never once imagined that anyone could challenge their absolute power. And now, a single human woman was doing exactly that. Elena Vasquez had finally stopped smiling her diplomatic smile. And the galaxy would never be the same again. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the command bridge of the flagship Remember New Haven and watched the Krethvi home fleet slowly realize that it was completely surrounded. 60 human warships had emerged from carefully concealed positions around the Krethvi homeworld. These were not the clumsy transport ships and tiny patrol frigates that the elder races had learned to dismiss with contempt. These vessels were something entirely new, something the galaxy had never witnessed before. The ships were sleek and powerful, designed by engineers who had spent 6 decades studying captured alien technology and finding ways to improve upon it. Their hulls were covered in materials that absorbed sensor signals. Their engines produced almost no detectable emissions. They could move through space like ghosts, invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. And the Krethvi were only beginning to comprehend how badly they had underestimated the species they called primitive. "Admiral, the enemy fleet is attempting to activate their weapons systems," the tactical officer reported from his station. "Let them try," Yuki responded calmly. "Activate the suppression field at full power." The Remember New Haven broadcast a specialized signal that spread across the entire Krethvi military formation. The signal was the result of decades of research, designed to exploit weaknesses in conquered technology that the elder races had never bothered to fix. One by one, the massive Krethvi warships went dark. Weapons that had been charging suddenly lost power. Engines that had been preparing to maneuver fell silent. Defensive shields that should have protected the ships flickered and collapsed. The mighty Krethvi fleet hung motionless in space, completely helpless. Every vessel was disabled but undamaged. Every crew was alive but unable to do anything except wait. "Suppression field has achieved complete effectiveness," the tactical officer announced. "All enemy vessels are neutralized. 0 casualties reported on either side." "Excellent work," Yuki said with satisfaction. "Open a communication channel to their command vessel." A moment later, the face of the Krethvi fleet commander appeared on the main display screen. He was enormous, even larger than the Archon, with scales that had turned pale gray from shock. "What have you done to us?" he demanded. "What is this impossible weapon? How can this be happening?" Yuki studied the commander for a long moment before responding. This was the fleet that had terrorized human shipping lanes for generations. These were the ships that had raided human colonies and enslaved human citizens while laughing at human weakness. And now the entire fleet was as helpless as a newborn infant. "For 60 years, humanity has been carefully studying your technology," she explained in a patient tone. We captured damaged vessels from your raids and took them apart piece by piece. We analyzed every component. We found your systems rather simple and predictable, actually." She allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. "Your power systems rely on crystalline energy matrices that are extremely vulnerable to specific harmonic frequencies. Your weapons require neural interface connections that can be disrupted by targeted electromagnetic pulses. Your defensive shields are impressive but follow patterns that are easy to predict once you understand the underlying mathematics." The commander's scales flushed with angry color. "You studied us. You analyzed our technology. That is impossible. You are primitives. You lack the intelligence for such work." "That is what you believed," Yuki agreed. "You never considered upgrading your defenses because you never imagined anyone would figure out how to defeat them. Why would you worry? No other conquered species would dare to challenge you, and humans were too backward and stupid to pose any threat." She leaned forward slightly. "You were wrong about us, very, very wrong." The commander struggled to maintain his composure. "This is an act of war against the entire conquered. You will be annihilated for this aggression. Every human world will be reduced to ashes." "The conquered is rather occupied at the moment," Yuki replied. "You see, your fleet is not the only military force receiving unexpected visitors today." Across the vast expanse of conquered territory, similar scenes were unfolding simultaneously. The Theshan science stations that had conducted so many horrific experiments on human subjects suddenly found themselves surrounded by human warships. Each ship broadcast the same simple message on repeat: "Release all human prisoners immediately. You have exactly 1 hour to comply with this demand." The primary conquered military headquarters discovered that human vessels had been hiding in the nearby asteroid field for months. Now those ships were emerging from concealment, their weapons pointed at every strategic target on the base. Colony worlds that had been stolen from humanity watched as human transport ships descended from orbit. But these ships came not to attack or destroy. They came to evacuate every human being who wished to leave, to rescue people who had lived under occupation for years or even decades. In the Galactic Concord Assembly Hall, delegates received frantic reports from every corner of their territories. Human ships were appearing everywhere. The humans possessed technology that no one had known existed. The humans had weapons that could disable entire fleets without causing a single death. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the panicking delegates, calm and composed, while chaos erupted all around her. "This cannot be real," the Theshan delegate stammered. Her silver feathers were trembling violently. "You are a primitive species. You cannot possibly have developed such advanced technology." "You keep using that word," Elena observed thoughtfully. "Primitive. Tell me, what truly makes a species primitive? It is not their level of technology. It is their refusal to learn and grow and adapt. It is their belief that power gives them the right to abuse those who are weaker." She gestured toward the screens showing human vessels positioned throughout conquered space. "While you were busy congratulating yourselves on your natural superiority, humanity was learning. Every ship you captured from us, we eventually captured from you and studied. Every weapon you used against our people, we analyzed and improved. Every piece of technology you proudly displayed, we examined and made better." The Archon had partially recovered from his initial shock. His scales had stopped their frightened trembling, and his voice was almost steady when he spoke. "Very well, you have demonstrated your point. You possess weapons and ships that we did not expect, but you cannot possibly defeat the combined military forces of 12 species. Even if you achieve victory in this initial engagement, reinforcements will arrive. You will ultimately be destroyed." Elena shook her head with what might have been sadness. "You still fail to understand. We did not come here to destroy you. We did not come seeking revenge. We came here to deliver a message that you have refused to hear for 300 years. She activated a communication channel that broadcast to every inhabited world in conquered space. People of the Galactic Conquered, my name is Ambassador Elena Vasquez, and I speak for United Earth. For 300 years, humanity has suffered in silence while others abused us. Today, that long silence finally ends, but we do not wish to end it with death and destruction. She paused to let her words reach across the light years. Look at your fleets. Examine your military stations. We possess the power to destroy them completely, but we have not fired a single offensive weapon. We have not taken a single life. Our technology was specifically designed to disable hostile forces without killing anyone. Images appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, showing human vessels holding their fire while conquered warships drifted helplessly. This is who humanity truly is. This is what we believe. We do not want to rule over you. We do not want to conquer your worlds. We want only what we have always wanted, to be treated as equals, to live in peace, to raise our children without fear that someone will steal them away in the night. Her voice hardened with controlled anger. But make no mistake about our resolve. Our mercy has definite limits. Push us again and we will push back harder. Hurt our people again and there will be severe consequences. Dismiss us again and discover what happens when a species with nothing left to lose decides it has nothing left to wait for. In the assembly hall, the delegates sat in stunned, terrified silence. On the bridge of the HFY command ship, the fleet commander stared at his useless weapons and wondered how his entire understanding of the universe had proven so completely wrong. Across 1,000 different worlds, citizens of 12 ancient civilizations watched the broadcasts and understood that the galaxy they had known no longer existed. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on her bridge and permitted herself one moment of deep satisfaction. After centuries of patient suffering, humanity had finally stood up and demanded to be recognized. But the work was far from complete. They had demonstrated what humanity could do. Now they needed to show the galaxy who humanity truly was. Transmit new orders to all human vessels, she commanded. Maintain current positions but continue to hold fire. We came here to deliver a message, not to commit mass murder. Let the galaxy see that we meant every word we spoke about mercy. The communications officer acknowledged the order and transmitted it across the fleet. Yuki turned to look out at the stars, thinking of all the people who had suffered and waited and hoped for this day to arrive. This moment is for all of you, she whispered quietly, for every victim, for every survivor, for everyone who refused to stop believing that things could change. The reckoning that humanity had prepared for so long had finally arrived. And humanity was only getting started. The war that everyone had feared would destroy the galaxy lasted only 9 days. 9 days of tension and uncertainty stretched across countless star systems. 9 days of human warships holding position around conquered worlds, while diplomats argued desperately about what the future would hold. 9 days during which the entire galaxy held its breath, waiting to discover whether civilization would survive or crumble into ashes. In the end, survival won, but the peace that emerged was very different from anything the galaxy had known before. On the 10th day, representatives of all 12 conquered species gathered once again in the assembly hall. They came not to celebrate their power, but to hear the terms that humanity intended to impose. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the central podium, occupying the position where only full members of the conquered had ever been permitted to stand. I will now present our conditions, she announced to the assembled delegates. These terms are final and will not be negotiated. The delegates shifted nervously in their seats but remained silent. They had witnessed what human vessels could accomplish. They understood they had no position from which to argue. First, the HFY Empire will return every human being taken during raids over the past 300 years. Those individuals who cannot be returned because they died in captivity will be honored with formal public apologies delivered to their surviving families. Financial compensation will be provided for every life that was lost, every year of freedom that was stolen, every family that was torn apart. The HFY Archon opened his mouth as if to protest these demands, then closed it again without speaking. What argument could he possibly make? The evidence compiled in the ledger was comprehensive and undeniable. Second, the Thessian hegemony will immediately release all human subjects currently held in research facilities. Medical teams will be provided to assist survivors in recovering from their traumatic experiences. All Thessian research conducted on unwilling subjects will cease permanently. Human observers will be assigned to Thessian institutions to ensure complete compliance with this requirement. The Thessian delegate's silver feathers pressed flat against her body in obvious distress, but she nodded her acceptance. She understood that resistance was no longer an option. Third, every human colony world currently under conquered occupation will be returned to human governance without delay. Colonists who were forced to flee their homes will be given the choice to return. Those who suffered under occupation will receive assistance in rebuilding their lives and communities. Alina paused briefly to allow these demands to be fully absorbed. Fourth, humanity will be granted complete and permanent membership in the Galactic Concord, with full voting rights equal to any other species. There will be no more observer status. There will be no more being ignored and dismissed. When decisions are made that affect human beings, human voices will be heard and respected. The delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances. Full membership had never been granted to any species so rapidly, but no species had ever surrounded the Concord with a fleet of previously unknown warships either. Finally, and most importantly, the crimes documented in the ledger will be acknowledged publicly before the entire galaxy. Every species will know what was done to humanity during these 3 centuries. Future generations will learn from these terrible events so that nothing similar ever happens again. Alina stopped speaking and surveyed the assembly with calm, steady eyes. These are the terms humanity offers. Accept them, and our forces will withdraw peacefully. We will work alongside you to build a better galaxy for everyone. We will share our technological advances and our scientific knowledge. We will become genuine partners instead of victims. She allowed the silence to stretch for several heartbeats. Refuse these terms and discover what exists beyond the restraint we have demonstrated today. The military capability you have witnessed represents perhaps 1/10 of what humanity has prepared. We have ships you have not seen. We have weapons you cannot comprehend. And we carry 300 years of carefully controlled anger that we have kept locked away. She looked directly at the Archon with an unwavering gaze. Do not force us to release it. The vote that followed was unanimous. All 12 species accepted every one of humanity's conditions without requesting any modifications. They had seen human mercy demonstrated in action. None of them wished to experience human wrath. In the weeks and months that followed the vote, everything about galactic civilization began to change. HFY vessels started the long process of returning human captives. Some of these people had been held in slavery for decades. The reunions with their families were filled with tears of joy and sorrow. Alina Vasquez attended as many of these emotional gatherings as her schedule permitted, offering comfort to families who were finally becoming whole again. Thessian research stations released their prisoners. Medical ships staffed entirely by human doctors arrived to provide treatment for survivors who had been damaged by years of cruel experimentation. Recovery was slow and difficult, but humanity demonstrated the same patience in healing that it had shown in preparing for war. Human colonists returned to the worlds that had been stolen from them. They planted new crops in familiar soil. They rebuilt homes that had been destroyed. They started the long journey of transforming occupied territories back into thriving, free communities. And in the Galactic Concord Assembly, humanity finally claimed its rightful place among the stars. Ambassador Elena Vasquez cast the first human vote in Concord history. Appropriately, it was a vote supporting increased protections for developing species, ensuring that no young civilization would ever endure what humanity had endured. Captain Marcus Chen attended the memorial service honoring the victims of the New Haven massacre. 3,000 children and 9,000 adults were remembered by name in a ceremony that lasted for 3 full days. Representatives from every conquered species traveled to pay their respects and acknowledge their collective shame. "I never truly believed this day would come," Marcus confessed to Elena after the ceremony concluded. "I never imagined they would actually accept responsibility for what they did." "They had no alternative," Elena replied thoughtfully. "We removed every other option, but I hope that as time passes, their acceptance will become genuine understanding. I hope they will eventually learn to see us as equals not because we forced them to, but because recognizing our equality is simply right." "Do you honestly believe that kind of change is possible?" Elena smiled, and for the first time in many decades, it was a completely authentic smile. "I have to believe it is possible. Hope is what sustained me through 30 years of humiliation and abuse. Hope is what kept humanity building in secret when surrender would have been easier. Hope is what inspired us to develop weapons that disable instead of destroy. We demonstrated mercy to the galaxy, even when the galaxy had never shown any mercy to us." She looked up at the stars visible through the memorial's transparent ceiling. "If humanity can accomplish that, then anything is possible, even teaching ancient species to adopt new ways of thinking." Years flowed into decades, decades accumulated into centuries. Humanity became a true partner in galactic civilization. Human scientists collaborated with Thetan researchers, and together they achieved discoveries that benefited every species. Human merchants traded freely with HFY worlds, creating prosperity in places where only exploitation had existed before. Human diplomats helped resolve conflicts between species, applying the patience humanity had developed through 300 years of suffering. And whenever a new species was discovered, whenever a young civilization achieved first contact with the conquered, they were welcomed with genuine respect. No one wanted to repeat the catastrophic mistakes of the past. No one wanted to create another enemy like humanity had been forced to become. These new species always asked the same curious question: why did the elder races treat newcomers with such unusual consideration? Why did they work so diligently to ensure that developing civilizations were protected from harm? The answer was always the same. It was recorded in the history books of 12 different civilizations. It was taught in schools across 10,000 worlds. It was passed from one generation to the next as both a warning and a lesson. Because no race ever forgot the day humanity's patience ran out. They remembered the quiet species that had smiled politely and filed paperwork for 300 years. They remembered the shocked silence that fell over the assembly hall when Ambassador Vasquez rose from her observer's chair. They remembered the terror of watching human vessels materialize from hiding places no one had thought to search. And above all else, they remembered the mercy. Humanity could have destroyed them utterly. Humanity could have taken bloody revenge for centuries of abuse and murder. Instead, humanity had shown restraint. They had demanded justice rather than blood. They had built weapons specifically designed to disable rather than kill. That mercy was perhaps the most frightening revelation of all. It proved that humanity had maintained complete control over the situation from the very beginning. Every polite smile, every ignored grievance, every moment of apparent weakness had been a conscious, deliberate choice. Humanity had chosen to be patient, and then humanity had chosen to stop being patient. The elder races never forgot that profound lesson. They never forgot that quiet species might be thinking dangerous thoughts. They never forgot that patience and weakness were not the same thing. And they never, ever forgot what waited beyond that patience. Because some lessons, once truly learned, remain learned forever. Elena Vasquez lived long enough to witness the completion of everything she had worked to achieve. She died peacefully at 112 years of age, surrounded by family and honored by every civilization in the galaxy. Her final words were carefully recorded and preserved for future generations. "Teach them to be patient," she whispered with her last breath. "Teach them to hope, but also teach them to be ready, because no one can predict when patience will no longer be sufficient. And when that day arrives, humanity must be strong enough to do what must be done." She smiled one final time. "We were strong enough, make certain we always will be." And so this story concludes, not with destruction but with hope, not with revenge but with justice, not with silence but with a voice the entire galaxy had finally learned to respect. No race ever forgot the day humanity's patience ran out. And no race ever wanted to discover what existed beyond it.